Hello, everyone. Welcome to MediaNama. Recently, multiple journalists and members of the parliament, including Mahua Moitra, Priyanka Chaturvedi, and Siddharth Varadarajan, the founding editor of The Wire, took to social media to share that they had received an alert on their smartphones saying that they might be targets of state-sponsored attacks. We are joined by MediaNama's founder, Nikhil Pava, to discuss these attacks and what we can infer from them. Hi, Nikhil. So, the first thing I wanted to ask you was, how do you think Apple knew for sure that these were state-sponsored attacks?
Uh, Thanks, Kamya. So, if you look at it, it wasn't just these 4, 5 people. There was uh, Raghav Chadha of the AAP, there was Pawan Khera of the Congress. So, fairly widespread attack from both politically, and even the editor of the Deccan Herald was there. So, just from a journalism, from a media perspective, but also from a think tank side, Samir Saran, the president of ORF, also got this notification. Now, how would Apple know? Actually, we don't know, and Apple never tells either. And there's a reason for that. But first, Apple and most systems actually check they keep constantly monitor the performance of the device on the device. And they're able to, for example, if there's a certain amount of activity that's going on, or there's a certain type of activity going on the device from a telemetry perspective, or if there is a vast amount of data that is being shared outside the device in one go or in a continuous manner, all of that basically is something that the device can track. Or if, let's say, something has been switched on without, let's say, a camera has been switched on or a mic has been switched on. So we don't know the exact mechanics, and Apple uh, doesn't tell how this happens, simply because if they explain how they find out, there will be countermeasures by hackers to make sure that these systems are basically not able to detect the malware. So it's a constant battle. Spyware and malware systems constantly try and evade detection, and those like operating systems and stuff, they try to identify whether there is such activity happening and what is the malware, etc., etc. Now, one signal is that perhaps the kind of malware attempt or the attack or the kind of activity that is happening must have been very sophisticated and very difficult to detect. So Apple is making an educated guess that this could be state sponsored, because typically only states have the resources to purchase that kind of equipment at that scale. And so, there are certain players like the NSO group, which sells the Pegasus tool, which they sell only to governments. So and these some of these systems are extremely expensive to run because of their sophistication, because of the resources that they require. So we don't know exactly how Apple would know, but it's more like educated guesswork that points towards state sponsored sophisticated attempts to hack, or state sponsored hacking.
I wanted to flag that only Apple has released such an update. So, what does this tell us about the differences between Apple and Android devices? Does this mean Androids are safer?
I don't think it means that Androids are safer. In fact, I would say that it indicates that, because Android, as far as I understand, and I could be wrong about this, does not give such notifications. I would say that they are less responsive to the needs of their customers. But let's not forget that Android is open sourced, and so therefore it gets stress tested much more than other platforms, because people can actually, because of the wider deployment, because of more usage, and more people trying to attack, they're actually able to find gaps in their systems and block them. Apple is less open about its systems; it gives less access, and so therefore, at times, one can't tell where the security vulnerabilities are, which are much easier to figure out with Android. because of just a wider scale of use even. Let's just be very clear about this. No system is fully secure. So I know that there were, the minister talked about Apple's encryption and Apple's security and how this might have been a misstep. But frankly, if you go back to the first Pegasus reports that came out, that happened through an iOS vulnerability that was there in the WhatsApp app. So it was a WhatsApp vulnerability in the iOS system that basically allowed Pegasus to be installed on the devices, either through just a message or a missed call, or those mechanisms, right? So also how these attacks happen can also be very sophisticated. Like it could be, someone could get a message that an e-commerce parcel is being delivered, or someone could get a message that, let's say, they have to pay a particular bill, and a link comes along with that SMS or WhatsApp text or some other mechanism. And when you click on it, it it could lead to the installation of malware on your device. So we have to be very careful about what we click on and how we click on something. So the delivery mechanisms are also sophisticated. There's a lot of social engineering. What that also tells you is that this kind of activity is typically targets a particular kind of person. And that's another indication of why this is probably state sponsored, because if you look at it, there are opposition party members. But hey, let's not forget, I believe Piyush Goyal, a minister in the BJP government, has also said that he received a similar notification. So, it could be anyone who does this, but the nature of the people being targeted also indicate that that this could be a state. Which state it is again very difficult to figure out, because often these attacks basically hop through multiple jurisdictions. They go through, different servers, different mechanisms. So tracing it back to the originator or the originating IP address is extremely complicated and frankly impossible. So also many of these attacks are such that they are diffused in a manner that is difficult to pin it down to one source. So, that way, when someone says that Apple should tell you which state it is, in all probability, Apple will never be able to tell you which state it is. And no amount of forensic investigation can actually tell you this. Technically identifying someone that they did this is next to impossible. And we saw that with Pegasus as well. I mean, the reports are that the committee said that there is that there was malware found on 5 devices, but it may not have been Pegasus because they can't conclusively figure out that it's Pegasus. Same thing happens in all sorts of malware. Sometimes even finding out which software it is actually complicated. So technical systems are built to evade identification, and attribution of an attack is next to impossible. In fact, we did an interview with Lieutenant General Rajesh Pant when he was India's national security coordinator. And I remember that he told us that they cannot conclusively, they don't know if it was North Korea, or he said that he couldn't confirm that it was North Korea that did the Kudankulam attack. Whereas the initial news reports said North Korea, right? So attribution is extremely difficult, and most countries, most systems, technically they can't do it. Unfortunately, what happens for lawyers in court is that they're looking for a smoking gun, or they're looking for a murder weapon with fingerprints on them. And tech doesn't work like that, and they don't seem to realize it. It's all probabilistic.
So effectively, you're saying that it's difficult to hold anybody legally accountable for these attacks.
That's not necessarily true. There is a mechanism available, which is that you collect all the evidence and you see which way it points. So there is a probabilistic outcome which is feasible. And very often in cases, when a judge rules on something, right, if it's a murder, for example, They may not necessarily have a weapon with a fingerprint, but from a probabilistic perspective, they're able to rule on whether the judge thinks someone is guilty or not. And all of this is probability. So it can happen in this case also. So, for example, the nature and the sophistication of the attack and the nature of the people that were attacked can point you towards a direction that it's probably a state. Uh, which state, we don't know. That's one clue. The other clue is what kind of resources were deployed, right? And is there, let's say our government, the Indian government, is a suspect in this case. So, can there be an investigation of money being paid to purchase such software? Um, so, a financial trail is feasible. Deploying this software or this kind of spyware from within the country is also a possibility. So, were local resources used? So, was there a contract with an Airtel or an MTNL or a BSNL or a whatever ISP you choose? Is there a possibility that their resources were used? Is there data with export controls that such software was imported? Is this a part of a treaty with another government? So all of this information can actually conclusively, from a probabilistic perspective at least, prove that it could be the Indian government. Or because that's the only thing you can prove. If you want to say it's a Chinese government, uh, then you don't have access to that kind of financial data. But at least right now, there is an opportunity to absolve the Indian government of doing this by going through this investigation.
Speaking of the Indian government, so Union Ministers Ashwini Vaishnav and Rajiv Chandrasekhar responded to the alert. And their responses have been mostly vague. They've been blaming the security of Apple devices. I was hoping to get your inputs on, what your opinion is on the government's response to the whole situation.
So I think there is some investigation that has been like Certain has got involved, and they are the right nodal agency to do this in asking Apple for more information. And the government said that they will investigate the matter. What I find that this is a wholly pointless exercise because if potentially the Indian government is guilty, and let's face it, most of the allegations that are coming out from people is that it is the Indian government. There may be a couple of people that are either not saying anything or saying it could be someone else, but most of the allegations are against the Indian government. You can't allow an alleged party to investigate the case. This has to come from somebody else. So there needs to be an independent inquiry, and let's not forget the Pegasus case is lying in cold storage in the Supreme Court. And there's an opportunity for the Supreme Court now to reopen that case, to make public Justice Ravindran, in particular Justice Ravindran's conclusions. Let's not forget the Indian government did not cooperate with that investigation in the Supreme Court. They did not confirm, nor did they deny that they had they had used or bought, that they'd used or bought Pegasus. And that again points you in a direction that there is a probability that they could have done it. And therefore, that also points to a probability that they could have bought malware here, right? So I would say that it's contingent on the Supreme Court to actually take this up suo moto, because we're heading into an election. You have opposition party members and journalists and think tanks being spied upon. And if it is the Indian government, this could be impactful in terms of, for example, election planning for political parties. And we've had recently elections in Karnataka even, right? And the elections coming up. So it's important for the Supreme Court to, in order to protect the sanctity of election and the sanctity of our democracy, of our democratic process, for them to step up and actually investigate the case. And frankly, this has a bearing on how things proceed because the country needs surveillance reform. There are mass surveillance systems that are already in place. The centralized monitoring system is one that we know very clearly about, and all calls, all standard message, SMSs, regular text messages can actually be surveilled by the Indian government. The last available information was that there were almost 300 orders per day being signed, which means that there's no application of mind by the government to doing this kind of surveillance. And even for a review committee to review thousands of orders every month is like crazy. So just the scale at which surveillance is potentially happening or can happen is a violation of our fundamental right to privacy. And the data protection bill has failed to protect us. So there is a case for surveillance reform. The government clearly does not have an intention to do this because they had the opportunity with the data protection bill. The government is suspected of surveillance. We have one hope left, which is the Supreme Court here.
Thanks, Nikhil. Those are the questions I had for you today. And thank you to everybody joining us. You can read our detailed coverage on the alert on our website.